Okay, we're going.
Okay, welcome everyone to day 2 of the SUNY Online Summit. I'm Susan Warner, Manager of Online Student Supports with SUNY Online, and I'll be serving as this session's moderator. So I'll be keeping an eye on the chat throughout the session, so please feel free to drop questions in the chat as they come up. And time permitting, we're going to wrap up with a Q&A. And just as a reminder regarding captioning, as Kay mentioned earlier, the captions are on for the recording, but if you want captions on for yourself during the presentation, you will need to turn them on the bottom of your Zoom where you have your icons, click on the more with the 3 dots and you can turn on captions. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Ed Venit, Managing Director and Education Futurist with EAB. Ed brings nearly 20 years of experience studying the major forces shaping the future of post-secondary enrollment and student success. His work helps institutional leaders understand how recruitment, graduation, and career placement strategies are evolving and what those changes can mean for the decade ahead. Ed shares his insights with thousands of higher ed leaders each year through presentations, webinars, one-on-one conversations, making him a trusted voice in navigating the shifting higher ed landscape. And Ed holds a PhD in evolutionary biology from Duke University, where he researched the evolution of division of labor in marine invertebrates, and even had the opportunity to teach a course on dinosaurs. So please join me in welcoming Ed Venit.
Thank you, Susan. And hopefully you can hear me all right there. Welcome, everybody here. Thank you so much for having me. I've had the pleasure of speaking both virtually and in person to this group for many years now through, just a variety of different time periods and a lot of different challenges. We certainly have an interesting moment right now. As you can tell from the title here, it's hard to even put a title on exactly what you would call the moment right now other than a moment of change. What I'm going to share with you today is the keynote that I delivered at our Student Success Conference Connected back in October, and we've since used for some of our Navigate partnership webinars. If you're familiar with Navigate or Edify, these are some of our student success technologies that you may be using. And folks have, in the audience maybe have already seen this before, but please, I invite you to hang out and see it again. For those of you who have not seen this yet, let me walk you through what we're about to experience together. First of all, this is me, title, and I understand that I'm going to do a little bit more describing of some of these slides here for folks on the webinar. So if you wish to email me, my email address is evenit, evenit @eab.com. So just my first initial and my last name. V like Virginia, by the way, not Bennett. If you'd like to follow me on LinkedIn and you are right there, you can use that QR code. I talk about this sort of stuff all the time on LinkedIn. So if this is your jam by the end of the day, then please do hit me up there. All right, so this is what we're up to today. Roadmap. We're going to hit 3 different things. We have a moment in time where our students are simply not ready for the career market that they're entering into. And this is changing so quickly that even the slides I'm about to show you right now are a little bit intimidated in terms of just how rapidly evolving the early career market is for our graduates, both recent and just in the last couple of years. This is all happening at a time when governments are going to be holding schools more accountable for the immediate postgraduate outcomes of students as expressed in earnings, how much money they're making. We'll talk about that. I'll unpack it for you. It's not as scary as it might be, and there's an opportunity to really shine here, believe it or not. I know it sounds weird, but bear with me. And then we'll talk a little bit about where AI is and student success and kind of where maybe we'll think a little bit about kind of our mentality about adoption. This can be a different in kind AI talk than you've ever heard before. Most of the time, it's all about the Jetsons and the flying cars and all that. We didn't get that. I'm going to have a really pragmatic talk with you about this is what we got AI that can do right now and why it would be good. And also let's go into this with open eyes. What's in the benefit for us? Why would we want to do this? So that's our plan for today. Thank you for whoever called out, Duke. I got my Duke mic right here. You probably can't see it; it's blurry. And I'm looking through. Oh, thank you, Susan, for putting my email address in the chat. I'm referencing the chat right now. You can tell me looking over here. Feel free to fill that up with questions as we go. I'm not going to be able to hit them all as we get them, but I'm going to try to get them in a group at the end. Let's talk about what we all agree on when it comes to college value. There's a lot of different constituencies that have their interest in higher ed. So I'm think about all the different groups that we work with, including ourselves, every single day that want something out of us. And this is probably a fairly incomplete list. Make a list of what each of these groups in your own head would want out of higher ed, and there's not going to be a lot of overlap between those lists. However, there is some, and it looks like this. We all expect higher ed to develop our communities, specifically through workforce development, whether or not you want to call it directly that or indirectly through an educated citizenship. We all want that. We all want individuals to benefit from this. If you go to college and you spend the money and the time, you should be able to rise as a result. We want to promote that. And that is the big dream for college, isn't it? And frankly, this should pay for itself. We should be economically an additive thing to our country and society. We should be able to drive this sort of economic growth and be recognized as such for this. Everybody kind of wants this in some way, shape, or form. This is what we agree on. I'm going to suggest that this is going to lead us in a direction where the postgraduate outcomes of our students now become very, very important to us, so much so that it is an equal part of the student success story as retaining a student to the second year or all the way through to graduation. How they're doing after they graduate is now the third metric that I think we need to care much about. And unfortunately, for simplicity, that's going to be expressed as earnings. I'm going to try to sort of walk you through why that might not be the worst thing ever, because we can talk about college value in a lot of different ways. Earnings is a way to measure earnings, and just that. But the fact that students are getting that kind of value from the degree and able to pay their loans and able to live the kind of life that they wanted to is itself college value in a way. It's not the full value, but it's an important part of it. Let me walk you through a perspective on this. There's individual monetary ROI that comes from college. We make more money if we have a college degree, and we save more money. And if you are on the sort of trying to build some generational wealth, that is how you do it. Uh, from a societal ROI, we generate additional tax revenue, we grow the GDP, we spend less on public assistance for college graduates, we spend less on criminal justice, and we spend less on public health for college graduates. So we're generally a good thing when it comes to money for society, both for an individual and overall. There's plenty of lots of sort of non-earnings based or non-monetary ROI of college, and I want to call those out because they're all important. The non-monetary ROI, which we won't talk as much about today, are things like this. Well, if we're spending less on criminal justice, it's because we're committing fewer crimes. We're also healthier. Again, public health savings. We live longer lives. We have stronger families. We feel more agency and empowerment when we have college degrees. We're more accepting of others, maybe because we've had more exposure to others. We don't like authoritarians that much, and that's a good thing because we tend to vote a lot, as well as just being overall happier on scales of such. So these are all things that come along with and are part of the value of having a college degree in the sense of you have an education. But if we're not able to return the economic value, all this stuff on the right side becomes so much harder to sell to students. You're going to get all those great things and we're going to be able to do all these things, but unfortunately, it's not going to work out for you monetarily. That's a harder story to sell. So we do need to be thinking about earnings. And there's another reason to be thinking about earnings here, which is if you look at the stuff on the right side, there's a lot of sort of secondary things that get caught up in there. If you're doing well, it means you have a stable life and a stable job, and you have lesser stresses coming in from those sort of things in your life. And isn't that why we try to do this in the first place? And with the conclusion on this is, money can't buy you happiness, but it makes being miserable a lot better. And what do we want that for our students? So unfortunately, we've had a slow decline in kind of how this value has been conveyed to our students. And this has been happening in sort of a slow motion way that just hasn't been getting enough press until this year, but it's actually been going on for a long time. So let's take a look at this graph. What you're about to see here is the unemployment rate across the US normalized to zero, meaning it goes up and down, but we're normalizing it to zero here. This means you're more likely to be unemployed if you're above the line, less likely below the line. These two hashed areas are our two recessions, the big one and the little one from COVID. And then what I'm going to show you is different sort of populations of Americans and how they fare versus the baseline unemployment rate. These are non-college educated 22 to 27-year-olds. And they're always more likely to be unemployed in every environment. And especially so in times of economic trouble. These are the folks that tend to lose their jobs the first. If you have a college degree, you're always more likely to be employed, especially during times of economic trouble. Yes, the unemployment rate might go up, but not as much as others. And especially during times like this, we have started crafting a narrative around the value of a degree. And that value is heard by 22 to 27-year-olds in the past. And for those recent grads, they also experienced a lower unemployment rate, especially during the Great Recession. And that locked in a lot of mindset around the value of a degree. A degree is the pathway to having a stable job and you won't be unemployed. You got to do this, and that's why you're going to college. So if the value of a college degree was always somewhat about advancing your career, it really, really got locked in about that specific thing at this time for these populations of students. And that's actually a lot of you on this call today, because if you think about when you started college, that might have been that moment. Um, Over time, the advantage of having a college degree eroded away, and there was a crossover event in 2018 that few noticed. I certainly didn't until I started looking at these numbers. But ever since, a college graduate has been, a young college graduate has been just as likely, if not more likely, to be unemployed as an average American. And now it's reaching the point where the unemployment rate, and this data is from earlier in 2025, so it's actually a little worse right now, but the unemployment rate for a recent graduate is around 6%. The unemployment rate for a non-recent graduate of the same age is just over 7%. So that advantage has really eroded right there. So we need to be taking a look at this with great concern, and I'm hoping that to sort of shed some light on this. Our graduates are having a hard time getting jobs, and it's not simply because of AI or because of economic changes or tariffs or whatever might be happening in the last couple 18 months or so. It's been going on for a long time, and there's a larger story to be told here. And this is sorry, I didn't click this last one right here. For those who are asking about slides and things like that, yes, we've already passed those along, and you'll have access to those. So thank you for asking. If you are curious, all of the sources are down here in the lower right. So if you want to get into all the data and nerd out on this stuff like I like to, you can do that as well. Let's talk about academic readiness, because you're going to see a very suspicious pattern that looks a lot like what I just showed you when we start looking at our math scores. So this is the high school graduating class, is the percent of students who take the ACT and score better than a 22 on the math component. Why is that important? This is what ACT says is sort of the indicator that you could pass a college math class. You can pass college algebra. And so the percentage of students taking this test is sort of the indication of where we're at on that. And if you recall, about 20 states, 20 plus states require their high school students to take the ACT. So this is a somewhat representative sample of America. So since 2015, you can see that the percentage of students who are scoring a 22 or better on the ACT math has been steadily declining from 44 to 33% from 2015 to 2024. Do not blame the pandemic for this fully, because it was happening before that, as you can see here from those numbers. It's not just this, it's been across the board. ACT 26 and above, similarly declining. And for those of you who recruit very selective students, ACT 30 and above, well, there's now less than half of the students, 11% down to 55. So we've had a real decline in how students are doing on the ACT. And if this is an indication, I have seen it replicated in other tests, that our students simply know less math when they're showing up in college. That might also be trickling through to how they're faring on the job market, regardless of our best efforts to sort of lift back up out of this. So there's more extra work to be done here. And also we might still be seeing some after effects. It's unlikely this is going to get better. We're now enrolling the cohorts of students who were in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade during the pandemic first year. That was a critical moment in time, because there's two big things you got to learn in K-8. The first is we would like you to learn how to read by the end of 3rd grade. That is a key indicator of literacy and lifelong literacy, in fact. The other big thing is you got to pass algebra by the time you finish high school. And the key to passing algebra is doing a lot of the pre-algebra work in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. These students had a disrupted educational year in that moment, and we are concerned about their math abilities. They seem to be behind in this cohort. They have not caught up. And the next couple cohorts that you'll be enrolling, including the one that you just did this past fall, I've been calling them the math shark, because they're a little bit of a sort of a lurking threat below the surface that's been working our way since the pandemic. And it looks a little bit like this. We think that the sort of achievement rates from these groups, if we were to estimate using another test based on their 8th grade scores, are even lower than what we've had coming to us. So there's a few more years that we have ahead, unfortunately. All this means is we're going to need to double down on our math support for students, broadly and holistically speaking, which is a thing that higher ed knows how to do and has been thinking a lot about for a long time. In a lot of cases, it's a matter of just doing it. and making the changes and moving forward. The other really good thing here is that you're already. I've seen so many encouraging moves from math departments that are now getting with student success teams and realizing we have a common problem here and we're each other's solution in this regard because it's that moment in time. So I'm imploring you to move forward in this. It is very similar to where we were in the mental health crisis in 22 and 23. We now have a sort of similar math crisis where now we're going to have to rally around. And that's actually going to be a good thing because look at how great you are at supporting students and their mental well-being now. And you really weren't that way in 2019. Well, you can have that same kind of change now when it comes to stuff like this foundational math education that we know is, I mean, gosh, so many things are important to learn, but that might be the most important thing to learn as we go. We also have students who, as I've alluded to, are evolving from their socio-emotional readiness. Gen Z is not one generation from this mindset, it's three. And it really depends how old they were during the pandemic and what they experienced or didn't experience during that time. And you're going to recognize this in the students based on sort of where they were both in their grade progression and their age. You might see this in your own kids. You may be some of these people if you are in your, if you're an older Z in your mid 20s. So here's the, and let me just sort of lay it out, and because there's different kind of career challenges for each of these sub cohorts that need to be addressed. And I just also want to acknowledge this is not their fault. The pandemic was not Z's fault. They had a weird experience, and as a result, we are having some friction in the early job market. That is neither the fault of the employers nor the students, but it's something we're going to have to figure out together. I should say graduates, not students in that context. So here's the first thing: you have the bridge generation. They are roughly 24 to 28 years old right now. They remember the before times. They were in college during the pandemic, and they had impacted college learning. And maybe for some of the younger cohort there, a little bit of the social development that happens around 18, 19 years old in early college maybe didn't happen as much because folks were more kind of in their rooms rather than kind of out on the quad as they might have been in the past. These folks are having some sort of frictions in the workplace around things like showing up at 9 o'clock in the morning for the beginning of the workday or turning in deliverables on time. Because this was a lot of their education experience during the pandemic in college, which can also be formative for that. See hands going up for questions, but go ahead and put this in the chat and we'll come back to that. The group that you have in college right now, roughly speaking, the sort of typical age cohort, 18 to 23, that's the co-ed cohort that was in high school during the pandemic years. And you may have observed a change in this group. They seem to be more outgoing. They seem to be more social, and they seem to understand that they've missed out on something and they crave human contact. They're also way more skeptical of technology and how much social media is playing in their life. I don't know if that was an after effect of getting a whole lot more of it when they were 16, 17, 18 years old or not, but it's an interesting observation that you might have about these groups. These folks we're going to get into having their own career challenges that are just beginning now and are the things that a lot of you are working on. What's next? Well, we don't really know because we've got these AI digital natives. They're in high school. They're living in your basement right now, if you will. And we don't know. We're still learning. They're kind of like this, what would it be like if you went back to 1995 and you were in my cohort? I'm 49 years old, and we got email for the first time, and we were 17 years old. It was that moment in time where we had a technology that we didn't have to learn something new for. I didn't have to learn how to mail letters, really. I mean, I did. I know how to do that. But the vast majority of my communication in my adult life has been through electronic communication. For them, it's going to be AI. And we just don't understand how that's going to play out, but it's worth taking note of. We do know one thing about this group is they have fantastically short attention spans. And that can make it difficult even more so than by teenage standards. So this is something that we're going to need to sort of think through in terms of, say, assessment. Your score isn't low because you have a low score. It's because you didn't finish the test, perhaps. So different career challenges for different cohorts. For the older cohort that's out in the job market right now, for the most part, we're seeing challenges around professional communication and workplace habits. And again, this is a two-way street because also their employers need to be adjusting to them. For the cohort that's currently in college, concerns around executive functioning, confidence, self-management. And for those who are yet to come, we have concerns around concentration and also the expectations around personalization and real-time feedback as comes in an AI world. So interesting to see some of the commentary here in the chat. Carrie calls out that, yeah, these are my kids. They're digital natives, but the older ones won't use AI at all. There's a real tension here and a sort of neo-Luddite group that's developing around 20 to 24-year-olds in terms of their approach to AI. They just don't want it. And it's very interesting to see. It's not everybody, but it's definitely a noticeable population and noticeable attitude. So, why is this all important? Well, I just told you a bit of a disaster story, but I'm trying to rally you around why we need to make some changes here. And I'm going to propose that some of the changes we need to make are not going to be so foreign to us that we shouldn't and couldn't do them right away. And I'm also going to propose that we now have extreme urgency to do so because of some changes that are happening in terms of how governments are approaching financial aid and how higher ed is being held accountable for postgraduate outcomes. Um, I know this is scary. Go into this with a little bit of an open mind here. Walk me through this one. You may not like it at the end, but you may not hate it as much as you think. So we have earnings accountability Mad Libs. What am I talking about here? Over 2020, the course of 2025, two different systems of earnings accountability, meaning we are holding you in some way, shape, or form. We are looking at the earnings of your graduates in some way, shape, or form, and associate them with your value. And two different models emerged, but they actually were very much the same structure, so much so that if you just changed a couple words, they look identical. It's Mad Libs. So I decided to teach it to you in that way. Now, this is also not a new phenomenon. The stuff I'm talking about here goes all the way back to the second Obama term, where we were launched things like the college scorecard. These are bipartisan things that show up no matter who is in power, but in different flavors. I grew up in Washington, D.C. My dad used to say, when both political parties want it, it's going to happen. I'm presenting this to you as an inevitability and something that's going to accelerate because there's really nothing that's going to slow it down. And it's something we probably need to prepare for and lean into and perhaps get ahead of rather than try to fight back against. And it might be a good thing. Let's see. Let me teach it to you. I'm going to teach you a lenient example and a strict example because the words really do matter. Lenient example looks like this. Do graduates of your program out-earn workers with a prior degree? That would be a high school degree for bachelor's and associate's degrees, or a relevant bachelor's degree for a graduate degree, for 2 of the 3 years after graduating. Pretty reasonable, right? We should have had some value. This is the do no harm clause, if you will. This is already law. This is the big beautiful bill. This is the Senate version of that passed. I will alert you that the day before they voted on it, this word's graduates was different, and we will explain the implications of that in a moment. But this is essentially what the federal government is now saying. We want all of our programs to out there to be able to add some value to students that they wouldn't have had from an earning standpoint from simply a high school degree. If not, you're not allowed to give out federal student loans, and now actually Pell Grants are also part of that conversation as well. So who would lose access to loans? It's actually not that many programs, but it's worth noting why. And again, I'll sort of build my case here in a moment. Quite a few associates programs, to be honest. And certificates going to be a big component here as well. But a little bit of a twist here. A lot of associates programs don't really lean heavily into loans. So this might be mitigated. Very few bachelor's programs, but a lot of exposure in the arts. Think about drama and dance. And think about the student that graduates and goes off and waits tables in Manhattan trying to make it on Broadway. Well, that's going to be a concern here. And it's a few quite a bit of master's programs actually, and things that we really like English Lit, social work, ministry. These sort of things that don't often lead to education in a lot of cases. They don't often lead to high-paying careers, and as a result, the math works out poorly. So it is not great, but it is a limited exposure, and those who are aware of this and focused on it are, sort of focused on these immediate things. This was a warning sign, though, because the day before they voted, the word graduates used to say all students, which would have included your non-completers who are not making nearly as much as your graduates. And that will move your median down and make way more of these programs exposed. So the fact that they changed it a day before they voted is an indication that either somebody wasn't noticing, and this could have been an accidental disaster, or they wanted us to notice, and then they pull it back because it's coming back for us in a couple of years. So we probably should get ahead of it because, again, both parties want to move us in this direction, if in slightly different ways. What's a strict example? Because I'm going to show you what this could look like in the future, because we also got a preview in 2025. And it reads like this. Do former students of the institution, that would include non-completers, out-earn other early career workers, which includes other college graduates from other colleges, in the 8th year after starting their financial aid. That's only for tracking purposes, but it basically works out to the same timing as the big beautiful bill. So this is going to be a more strict system. It's going to include students that aren't going to be earning as much because they started with you, but they did not finish. And it's going to include other colleges, high earning students who maybe went on to, fancy graduate degrees with high earning potential. They'll probably not in the 8th year after they graduate, to be honest, or start financial aid. But you may wonder who brought us this draconian system. It was education. This is the Student Access and Earnings Classification that was released this past year by the American Council on Education and the Carnegie Foundation. It's not a bad accountability system at all. It's trying to look for schools that meet this actually quite lofty bar, and as a result are providing exceptional opportunity to students. This is an opportunity to find the schools out there, and there will be SUNY schools on this list because there's nearly 500 of them out there that provide, this really additive value that we would want to call out. We should be celebrating these schools. But the system itself and the actual wording are the same. So useful also in this moment for getting a sense of what the impact would have been and might be if the governments start turning up the pressure in the future, because state governments can do this too. The worst case scenario, if you will, would be about 26-ish%, called a quarter of programs out there or schools out there would be probably pretty fine. Over half of schools would struggle quite a bit in the arts and sciences, education, especially in the arts. And there would be a chunk of schools, oftentimes low enrollments or thousand students, so very small schools that are exposed to the low earnings group right here, and also a lot of associates programs. What's the takeaway here? I know it's a lot of data and this is very dense. The takeaway is this. If education holds itself to the standard that it's already set for itself, there's nothing that any government can do to us. We can get ahead of this problem by holding ourselves to our own standards and working towards them. Whatever is coming behind us, we'll have already gone ahead of. And I'm going to propose to you this. We're not going to do it the way that you think, because I know what's in your head already. So let me give you 2 clues for how we're going to do this in a way that might be a little bit different. Non-completers really matter. If you don't get the degree at all, you're making probably about 10% more than a high school graduate based on the numbers. Okay, so, that's actually a lot of us. This is the total US population by educational attainment, organized in strata. The lower strata are students who just have high school degrees. Higher up, you go to associates, bachelor's, and all the way up to graduate degrees. On the left side of the page, you have our older folks. You see the dip there from World War II. Here are all the generations that matter. And over here, you see a bunch of lazy 3-year-olds that have never accomplished anything in their lives whatsoever. A lot of them don't even know fully how to read right now. Do you know that? Regardless, what we should be looking at on this page is the orange swath in the middle. These are the people who started college who didn't finish. It's about 1 in 5 and 1 in 6 Americans, depending on what age range you're looking at. It's a lot of people. A lot of these folks took out loans. A lot of them didn't have a great experience. Our fault, their fault, doesn't really matter. They didn't finish. And if you're looking at the cohort of students that you're going to be judged on in the future, this is if you were being judged on non-completers in some way in the formula, this is a absolutely no-brainer place to start if your completion rates are not really where you want them to be, because there are going to be plenty of students out there that you can bring back if you have a focused institution-wide effort. For the most part, stop-out re-recruitment is kind of a side-desk activity, as we say in the consulting world. This suggested it now becomes a huge initiative with at least as much attention as you would apply to recruiting students in the first place, because it becomes that important. So that's hint number 1. Hint number 2 is this. We might not be having the best outcomes, and it might not be all of our programs. Let me show you some data that blew my mind when I finally ran it, and this is all New York Fed data. We are looking at the cross between underemployment on the x-axis, underemployment being defined as, do the majority of people in your job not have a college degree? Then this is not a college degree requiring job, and you are underemployed if you have a college degree and work and such. And it is a common thing for early career workers to end up as such. I spent my first year after college making photocopies. I was really good at it, but it was probably not a job that required a college degree, other than I knew where the libraries were on my college campus, which was what I was being asked to photocopy things out of. However, I did not need a college degree to operate a photocopier. I did eventually go to grad school. But yeah, these sort of things are the sort of things that, almost romantically, a lot of our early college or graduates almost end up in. But not these days. The stakes are way too high. So what does it look like? The median earnings of folks is up and down the y-axis. Sorry, by programs up and down the y-axis, and the size of the bubbles are the size of the programs. Here's where I would put professionally tracked programs. So these are, the college of something, the college of nursing, the college of business. These are things that students, based on the name, get into because they want that job. You go to the college of nursing to be a nurse. You go to the college of education to be a teacher, or in the area. So you see across the board kind of what you think. Now, this data is from 2023. So if you're looking here at the low underemployment rate for computer science degrees and high pay, of course, that hasn't been affected by the 2025 numbers on this yet. Nursing, the most solid thing out there you can do. Pay is great, really low on underemployment. Education, really low underemployment, doesn't pay as great, but it's out there. And you see across the board, you have criminal justice and hospitality that are a bit of outliers because they just are naturally fields with lots of non-college degree holders in them. And so that statistic doesn't actually really work as well for those. I want to show you this to give you a backdrop, because where do you think the arts and sciences are on this? They're here. They're all in a group. There is little differentiation when it comes to underemployment or earnings for any of our arts and sciences programs. And I say this as a biology major. So my experience in biology, and maybe that's true for these other ones that I've highlighted here, psychology, English, sometimes performing arts, is that they are sort of catch-alls for students who don't really know what to do with themselves. Oh, well, you can go into these sort of hyper flexible degrees, and when you find yourself, you go on, you can be a biochemist. But if I didn't know what I wanted to do myself when I started college, the odds that I still don't know what to do with myself are pretty high. And I'm in a program that is not purpose-built to get me a job, like it would be, say, in the College of Business or nursing or education even at times. So it's kind of the worst of both worlds, and we see the job outcomes here as a result. If I was to focus on one place where I would try to improve the earnings of your students, I would be talking to my students that are about to graduate and just did graduate in these four majors: bio, psych, English, and any of your performing arts. Throw history in there if you want to, if it's a big program for you, because these are the catch-alls that are going to grab those students and probably where you're going to find most of your underemployment problem. Could you accelerate these students' earnings after they graduate? Yeah. Don't let them end up being photocopiers, right? So if we can do more to help students even place them into jobs, I know that nobody wants to think about that, but even doing so far as to actually be the job agency for them in some cases, we're going to succeed more. So I know this is a new way to think about things. You don't have necessarily the infrastructure or the funding or the staffing for this. It is a rebalancing of what student success is, but it's clearly in the data. How can you approach this problem? There's sort of two ways to look at the career value problem: the long way and the short way. We oftentimes, maybe 99% of the time, talk about the career value problem just in the long way, and I'll explain it to you. We try to get lower paying programs and turn them into higher paying programs. Psych and English, if they're making 45K a year, let's turn them into 80K a year style jobs like computer science or engineering. But folks, this is a 10-year play. Why? We got to figure out what we're going to do. We got to design the courses. We got to hire the faculty. We got to recruit the students. We got to teach the students. We got to graduate the students. They got to be out there working for 3 years, and then we count their earnings. That's a minimum decade right there. You're doing it. It's right for your students, but it's also the benefiting the person who's in your seat next. Or you can take the short-term approach, which is that we're looking at the underemployment problem, the non-completers, and the unemployment problem. We're looking at the classes of 2024, 2025, 2026, 2027, and we're specifically focused on these very tactical level problems that reflect in the data. We then make the assumption that we're going to learn so much from this that we actually get better at actually making that connection that we see in the arts and sciences, or the lack of the connection in the arts and sciences, bridging those worlds so that we get to have everything. We have the arts and sciences, and also these students are getting jobs. Isn't that what we want in the end? We have to look at the numbers differently, though. And these are, I think, the way to look at them. I just want to scan through the questions right now. Yes, Marjorie, definitely calling out that we should be investing much more in educators. You will not find any argument from me or anybody on this call on that one. The underemployment graph is sobering. It was to me too, Carrie, but it was also even more sobering to realize it's all the arts and sciences degrees, with the exception of econ and math, to be clear. But for the most part, it's pretty widespread problem. Yet how many times have we heard those art history degrees it's actually all art sciences degrees are not the best performing out there. And we might want to look into that a little bit more closely. Musical therapy, ended up as a psych. Yep. I started as an engineer and ended up as a biologist, going through history and psychology on the way. Uh, yes. And Aaron, calling out how the even our doctoral recipients are having some trouble being hired right now. So yeah, the job market sucks, and we could be doing a lot more to help place folks. And there are models out there that higher education can use and digest. I like to call people the Wichita State's internship model, which is one of the better ones we've ever found. They place students directly into the aerospace industry, and a lot of those convert to jobs. There, there's learning there too because it's a revenue positive activity for the institution. So here's just to close things out. Here's option one, the long-term play, improve the earnings of your programs. Or your option number two is let's focus immediately on these classes that we have right now and fix their numbers and assume we're going to learn so much from this that we will build out those muscles that we don't have yet. All right, so our last section today, just in a quick time check, we're actually really great. Just a quick 10 minutes here on crossing the chasm with AI. What the heck is crossing the chasm? All right, well, if you've been in the technology biz for a few years, this is one of those things that shows up again and again. The chasm is the moment where you move from the early adopters to the majority. It's also the moment where you move from people who buy something because it's cool to buying something because it's useful. That's the moment I think we're at with AI, and I think it explains a lot of kind of our current, shall we call it, stall point that we might be at. So let me unpack this for you and suggest why this might be a really great thing if we were able to lead into it as student success professionals. So here's our staffing crisis. This is you. So half of you are working more than full-time hours. Over half of you have recently assumed the job of someone who left and are working extra time to complete those duties, and very few of you think you're being paid fairly for it. This is not awesome. It's already come up in the chat, right? This is a tough job, but you didn't get into this for this. You would have gone to Wall Street. You got into it because of the students and you want to change the world in this way. But my gosh, maybe we could just get your work week down to 40 hours. Shouldn't there be like a way to do that? Like if you're not going to get paid $1 billion, shouldn't we at least pay you back in free time? There has to be some way to control this. And I think AI might be the answer, but it requires us to think differently about our jobs. Let me walk you through it. We've sort of reached the point of inflated expectations on AI, which is a normal thing that happens with tech. This is the hype cycle and how it normally goes. You launch something, everybody gets excited about it, and then before you get to practical application, there is the trough of disillusionment. And the trough of disillusionment, that's where we're at right now. Again, I was promised flying cars, and I haven't gotten the flying cars. In fact, this AI thing makes a lot of mistakes still. I can make a picture of a cat riding a skateboard with a flamethrower, but how is that useful to me? Those are things that happen during the trough of disillusionment, and we're hearing it in your own words to us. My hunch is that we're a year out on this. We had a lot of momentum out of the gate. Seems like we stalled. I think we're all kind of waiting for something to happen. How many of you are thinking about these sort of things right now? This is a very natural trough of disillusionment moment. And now, sort of, let's talk about how to get through it, because there is a bright light on the other side here, in my opinion. I mentioned the chasm. It's part of this larger concept called the adoption curve. It's been studied since the 60s in business communities. It always kind of works like this in very predictable proportions. So of the population out there, there are five groups of us. There are innovators, early adopters. These folks are the visionaries. They like buying cool new stuff. They don't always, you could be a visionary for one thing and not for another thing. I was a day one iPhone adopter, for instance, but I never buy any tech on day one other than that. Then there's the early majority, late majority, and laggards. Those are sort of the pragmatists, the people that are out there. So these groups reliably fall into these percentages, if you will, with just under 20% being in the visionaries. 1 in 5, 1 in 6, roughly what you might say is our AI super user population right now, just among adults in America. How do you know who you're talking to? Well, if you're at and this is the chasm, by the way, this is the thing that the technologists are always trying to get across, to get from the people who want to buy it because it's cool to want to buy it because it's useful. If you're at a cocktail party and someone's calling you over and saying, hey, check this out, and you have no idea what they're talking about, but they're like, this is the next big thing. They're an innovator, right? And that thing probably will go nowhere. If someone's saying, hey, check this out, it does something really cool, they're probably an early adopter and they want to show off, right? They've got the thing. It is working, but it may not have the fully practical application yet, but they're very impressed by it and they want to show it off to you. These are the sort of folks that you talk to and they're sort of raising these sort of ideas for you can understand where they are on the curve. And that's where a lot of us are right now with AI. But there's plenty of nervous who are on the other side of the chasm. And what are we saying at the cocktail parties? The early majority are going to say something like, hey, this thing works and it makes my life better. The late majority is the FOMO crew. They're going to say, this is the new normal, I guess. And then the laggards, they're going to say something like, well, this is being forced on me, and I don't like it. So over time, business people have figured out how you cross the chasm. And the answer is, first of all, don't worry about the laggards or even the late majority. They'll come along naturally. You got to win the early majority, and that's where we are with AI use cases right now. And I'm talking about the practical ones, which I'll show you more of in a moment. AI will not go mainstream until it hits three things, and this is just understand from every chasm cross that's ever happened. It's got to be one, proven, no more mistakes, no more non-trustworthy responses, and we, have to understand exactly sort of where all the kinks are in this system. It has to be low risk, and that is everything from bias to, is Skynet going to happen, to everything in the middle, right? Also, lower risk maybe to our jobs and to our students' jobs. And it's going to become essential. Do we all remember the moment where we got smartphones and we realized having a map in your pocket that you can drive around with is like the best thing ever, and you would never want to go back to the spiral-bound random alleys? Half of you have no idea what I just mentioned. That's because you have a smartphone. It became essential. Immediately went from that. How about, taking pictures of your grandkids? It became essential really quick. There's going to be a moment like that with AI. I'm actually going to propose what it is in a second. So this is our curve right now. So the AIs that we're talking about that are going to help you cross, that are going to be in those categories of proven, low risk, all those things, are going to be the things that actually you won't even really notice making your life better, but they're going to sort of pile up like nickels and dimes. And I'm actually going to do that exercise for you right now with completely imaginary data. I want to be clear, this is entirely illustrative. It's not based on any kind of surveys. It's just here to teach you the story. So we think AI can give you back about 10 hours a week. And this is an exercise I like to do with people. Take everything you do for your job, start with what's most fun, all the way down to what's least fun. I bet you can get rid of the bottom 20%. That's a day a week. A lot of that stuff can be automated away because it's just work a day, kind of button pushing type stuff. AI can be super helpful for this. And I'm going to make it really real for you. If you're the sort of person who works with students on it every single day, I'm thinking about an academic advisor here, but think more broadly, you get the sense of where you are. Routine stuff you do. Answer an email. If you do that yourself, even if it's prefab, I'll give you 3 minutes to do that real quick. Human plus AI, 0 minutes because a chatbot did that. So let's put that on the board there. You save 3 minutes. Schedule a student meeting. Well, you got to chase down the same blah, blah, blah. Not if it's automated. That's another 3 minutes saved. Prepare for the meeting. Well, we all have become very familiar with AI summarizers, and they got pretty darn good. Well, if you have one of those on top of your student profile, which is something we have in Navigate, you can prepare for the student meeting in a much quicker time and probably learn a little bit more from going through those notes and seeing something that maybe you wouldn't have uncovered otherwise. Creating a course plan for a student is something that AI can help you with, because what better thing than something that can read the entire course catalog and do that tester scheme? Now you're talking to the student about their aspirations and not flipping through the catalog. Capturing meeting notes, my gosh, this is the game changer right here. If you've had the experience in the last 6 months of going to the doctor and using one of those AI audio transcribers, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It is way different to be talking to your doctor face to face than having their face buried in a laptop. Well, in this story, you're the one with the face buried in the laptop because the student's talking to you and you're trying to take notes, which are going to be, I'm sorry, probably incomplete because you are a human. Or you're doing it late at night when you shouldn't be working because you have to catch up on your day. These AI transcribers, when they become trusted for you, and I think we're at that moment right now, should be a huge game changer on the amount of excellent information you can capture from your students. And it's probably more than saving you 4 minutes. Sending follow-ups, rebooking no-shows, these are other time savers. I would say the average advisor does all these things 20 times a week. Maybe in a busy time, maybe just normal times. Depends on how your staffing is. If you add all this up, yeah, you get to 10 hours. So this is a day. A full day a week that could be saved by using AI tech that's out there right now that is not, like I said, not the flying cars, not anything too crazy. We understand what a transcriber is. It's just a different kind of recording. Well, we have to get comfortable with those sort of things if we want to take advantage of these sort of things. And the good news is that, frankly, we are getting more comfortable. It's a matter of adopting these things. So how do we start taking moments in our lives and saying, I want that life back, or I want that time back? Well, let's start with what it would do for us. And this is my last slide for today, because I think it's a really important message to be thinking about when you think about AI. We don't work for AI, it works for us. If you're worried about the early career market and you're worried about the impact, let's come around to the idea that in the end, it works for us. We are tool using animals, and this is just the latest and greatest tool. It's going to give you time back. That's going to be the promise here. And for in the business community, that's time you just spend reinvesting in the business. And you might want to do then hire it as well. But go back to the original slide that set up the problem for this section, which is you're overworked and underpaid. Wouldn't you like to just have the time back and be able to go home at 5 p.m.? Because there's so many different things you could do if you had an extra 10 hours a week. And that first thing would be sign off at 5 p.m. Reclaim your work-life balance. Be present for your family. Enjoy the job. Remember why you got into the first place. Number two, maybe you would take on some extra students. You got caseload gaps. The person next to you just left. AI can be the thing that can help bridge the gap in a moment. It's a patch in that moment. You can help get more done for students. You definitely improve your response rates through automation. How about taking on something new? You want to learn a new skill? You guys work at colleges. I mean, if you wanted to take a class on Friday, if you could, or advance your own education or your own skill set or do professional development, or I don't know, carve off an afternoon, buy 3 pizzas, lock yourself in a room until you figure out AI. Do whatever you can do these sort of things if you have a little bit of free time. Invest in yourself. And lastly, if you're concerned about the direction the world's taken and you feel like we're leaving students behind with the cancellation of things like TRIO programs and grants for this and grants for that, or this is being sunset, you don't like the direction that we've taken with DEI, you can step in and fill this gap in your own way with the students that you have in front of you if you had more time to devote to them. So if you want to and reinvest those times in your own students and you don't like what's been taken away, you can be the answer, but only if you have the capacity to give, and perhaps this is where you might find the capacity to give. So there's a lot of promise here, and this is all very human. So as you're thinking about those AI tools that are out there, be thinking a little bit about how do I get that time back? Because I want to use it to be more human. So folks, this is our conversation for today. This is me right here. If you want to follow me on LinkedIn for more information just like this, go right ahead. I want to leave you with one little message before we get to Q&A. This has been a tough, call it year and a half now for higher ed. We're getting beat up a lot. I mean, there's not a lot of people coming to our rescue. I want to personally thank you. We are important. The jobs you're doing are hard, and we all need you even more now than ever. Please keep your heads up. Please keep your chins up. There is a better future ahead, and we will get through this. We are now ready to respond, and I think there's going to be good things ahead for higher ed. Please hang in there. We all need you, and thank you very much for what you do.
Well, thank you, Ed. We do have 2 questions in the chat already, and the first one is from Andrea at Buffalo State, and she's asking, how are students going directly into law school or other graduate programs accounted for in this data?
Yeah,
Are
so
they considered unemployed?
no, those students are considered they were removed from the data set. It's only students that are out there. If you're full-time enrolled somewhere, you do not get included in this. It is the same data that is feeding into the college scorecard, which is the same methodology. And that is being pulled from the IRS. So it's able to, or the same data source, I suppose, as the IRS. So we are able to exclude, or the federal government is already excluding currently enrolled students, which, by the way, may be a solution to some of this, because if you need a master's degree tacked onto whatever your program is, eliminating those gap years might be an answer for you, because guess what? If you do a 4+1, when they start counting you, the bachelor's program benefits from the master's degree because it stacks right on top. So there's actually a way to kind of rig the system a little bit by using graduate degrees creatively in that regard. That wouldn't work for a law degree, obviously, but you see where I'm going.
That's great. And then Carrie asks, how does the fewer numbers of college-age students that schools are hoping will enroll with them play into this data? And there's another question.
So just the contracting Gen Z, the demographic cliff. Well, like it or not, New York, you've already lived through it. So for you, it's sort of the history lesson at this point in terms of the decline. But that's actually maybe a good thing because you've already reset. I am very uncertain about what this plays out in the 5 to 10 years of the next job market. Yes, we have far fewer young people coming into college, which means in a few years we will have far fewer early career workers. And yet right now, the job market was just, we have an oversupply of college graduates based on their inability to find jobs. So one of those two things is true or somewhere in the middle. And I could not tell you which one's going to win. But I do think that AI and sort of the integration of AI into especially the entry level ranks, is going to be a really, really interesting space to watch. And if you start seeing those jobs that used to help students get right out of college, like, those like first starter jobs becoming really AIified, but asking the person to use AI, their job changed. And now you need a young person in that job because they're going to be more fluid, more familiar, all the things with the AI, just like it was back in 1999 with email and the web and all those things. It's going to be just like that again. That's one possible future. But watch that interface in terms of like really like literally like the 0 to 1 year experience careers. That will tell you pretty much about where this is going to go and whether or not we're going to have too many or too few people in the end to fill these ranks.
And Carrie followed up that question with, I don't want to be a bit of a downer, but if we do all the good things to help graduates earn more with their chosen degree, and we can't get the enrollment numbers we're hoping for, then what does that mean for the future of higher ed and future students and graduates, and ultimately our economy? With that caveat, I still remain very hopeful, and it is, in my opinion, finding the way forward.
I really appreciate that sentiment because you laid out the stakes very cleanly. That is exactly what we're working for here. And I like your optimism because we really need it in this regard. So, what we're talking about here is if we have an enrollment issue going forward, your enrollment managers, the folks who are trying to recruit your students, and the students looking at you, if they can't see the value or the ROI of their education and it starts getting really highly publicized because of things like that I've talked to you about today, and the data becomes more and more out there, and the narrative starts getting set that college isn't valuable, that enrollment problem really becomes a big problem. And yeah, we do end up going in a spiral. So that's why we have to act now to protect against that and defend value. I am suggesting that defending value is both operating at a stratospheric level, in the cabinet level, if you will, and also at the very tactic level of I'm re-enrolling a stop out and they're going to get value from this in some way, shape, or form. And you will change that person's life.
Amen. And Andrea followed up and said, thank you for answering my previous question. Many colleges are attempting to address budget deficits in a variety of ways, including program deactivations.
Ugh.
Should earnings accountability factor into those decisions? Great
Andrew, I don't
question.
know if you've ever visited Washington, D.C., but in our subway in the metro, there's something called a third rail that you're not supposed to touch. That's so yeah. That is not my job or pay grade to make any kind of recommendations along those lines. I would recommend to a school, what are you and what do you want to be? If you have programs out there, and look, I'm just going to float something. If you're a music school, let's say, you're pretty highly exposed to these things. However, if you're music school, most of your students are not going to be professional musicians, but they might be agents. They might work in the music industry. So, what more can we be doing with those students to augment what they're trying to do? And so that we can be what we want to be and we don't cut those programs because we're actually going to lean in. And I'm just going to give you a little teaser here. There is a school of thought that I subscribe to that the single most valuable degree in the future for any student to get in terms of employability and earnings going into a world where AI is dominating the landscape is one that almost nobody would think of, and it's philosophy. So think about how big your philosophy programs are and how many of them might be on the blocks right now, and then also think about how important that kind of thinking is to winning an AI world as a human, and wonder if maybe we might be hitting a renaissance moment. Things change quickly. We often tell the story about the Arabic studies professor in the year 2000 versus the Arabic studies professor in the year 2002. It was a big moment in time for big change there. Same thing's going to happen. If you look at the end of the Cold War, things change quickly, and being able to have a wide variety of programs keeps us smarter. But we're going to have to protect those, and we protect those by deciding we have to be those things. But that means we also have to defend those things in that way.
And Maureen asked, decreasing math and reading scores have been historic, even before COVID, I believe. What other factors are being considered for these deficits instead of just COVID? What is being addressed at the
Oh,
K through 8 level?
yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother day-long conference right there if you want to go down that rabbit hole. It varies everything from, are we actually seeing a deficit here, or are students not finishing the tests because they have shorter attention spans, to Are we fully operationalizing how we can use online learning that we had to do in a great way? Because, there is something about math that is easier to teach if you have a computer in front of you in kind of a flipped classroom kind of way. To some very long view perspective on the long-term impact of eliminating No Child Left Behind, because we might have we didn't replace it with anything. And as a result, the bottom fell out of the test scores in some areas. So there's a lot of things to be looking at here. And certainly no one's able to say that this is a single causal thing. Certainly not the pandemic, but none of these things together help each other. They make each other, sort of a compounding event, if you will. So a lot of things are out there, and yeah, you can really go down a pretty deep rabbit hole. I have looking for some of the causes here, and there's really not being definitive, but man, there's a lot of discussion and research going on right now.
And I think we can close out with this last question from Carrie. Does your data include trade school graduates? My brother got a
Mm,
business degree and was an under earner. It wasn't great
mm.
for him. He is now a welder and earning now more than ever. That was the best fit for him.
Yeah, I would be a philosophy major with a welding degree. That would be that's like the most solid thing that I can think of for being in like 2035 in the market. It really depends on how the professional program is classified. We have associates and bachelor's degrees in here, but not really certificates, or a lot of for-profit programs aren't going to be represented well here. And the sad reality is a lot of those programs do not return an ROI. And indeed, one of the encouraging moments of this whole thing has been when bipartisan voices were here at the Department of Education actually accomplishing something where we pretty much together decided that if you're going to offer a certificate, for profit, nonprofit, we're all coming to the idea that it can't be a scam. We are not going to start pocketing Pell Grants just by offering a certificate. And a few of those programs that, let's just say, did not have the greatest reputation are the ones that would be, or the greatest return are going to be the ones that might be kill for cause in that kind of regard. So maybe a good thing will come from that. So so I guess we're at time. I would just close out, Susan.
Yes, and thank you so much, Ed. Just special thanks to Ed for such a fantastic presentation and for all of you for your time and attention during this session. So, SUNY Online, let me just put in the chat a couple of links for you. So the presentation materials and resources and recordings are going to be posted to the SUNY website, and we want to encourage you to continue the conversation. We'd love to keep it going. And if you've registered before February 16th, you now have access to the companion space and Brightspace, SUNY Online Summit Connect. And we know that often some of the best questions don't come out until you've had some time to think about it. Some of the most interesting reflections tend to pop out after the session's over. So in SUNY Connect, you can jump in to the discussion forums, ask follow-up questions, browse shared resources, and keep exploring the ideas that Ed's been talking about here today. So it's a great way to stay connected and to continue the momentum long after the summit wraps up. And just as a quick reminder, our next session, before they disappear, tools to identify and support new online learners, begins at 1:45 p.m. We hope to see you there. Thanks again, Ed.
Thank you.